She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a shop her family forgot existed. And in that forgotten place, she discovered that the story of her life, the one she'd been told, was a lie. The day I turned 18 was the day I became officially homeless. That's not how they phrase it, of course. They call it aging out. They use words like transition and independence. They give you a small cardboard box of your files, a final check for a few $100s that's meant to last until you find a job, and a handshake that feels more like a shove. For 2 years, from 16 to 18, the state had been my legal guardian. Now, on the morning of my birthday, it was firing me. I stood on the porch of the Northgate group home, the same porch I'd stood on the day I arrived, a bewildered 16-year-old clutching a backpack with my life inside. Now I was a bewildered 18-year-old, clutching a cardboard box. And the only difference was that this time, there was no one waiting for me on the other side of the door. The air was cold, a sharp, wet chill that promised a miserable November. It seeped through my thin jacket, the one they'd issued me from the donation closet. It was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, a perfect metaphor for my life in the system. Everything was ill-fitting. If you're watching this, and you know what it's like to stand at a crossroads like that, with the past behind you and nothing but fog ahead, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because we tell stories for people who've had to find their own way home. My social worker, Mr. Henderson, was waiting in his beige sedan, the engine humming impatiently. He was a good man, I think. As good as a man can be when his job is to manage the wreckage of other people's lives on a state budget. He had tired eyes and a permanent crease between his brows, as if he were perpetually trying to solve a math problem with too many variables. I was one of those variables. "Ready, Maya?" he asked, his voice gentle. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. I slid into the passenger seat, placing the box on my lap like a fragile shield. The car smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. It was the official scent of my adolescence. We drove in silence for a while, the windshield wipers keeping a steady, rhythmic beat against the drizzle. We were headed to a tiny, state-subsidized apartment, a single room with a kitchenette that would be mine for 3 months. After that, I was on my own. It was a starting line, but it felt like a cliff's edge. "There's one more thing," Mr. Henderson said, breaking the silence. He reached into the back and pulled up a dusty, red metal toolbox. It was old, with dents and scratches marking its surface like scars. "This was your father's." My breath hitched. My father. The name was a ghost in my mouth. He died a little over 2 years ago. A construction accident, they'd said. Sudden. It was his death that had sent me tumbling into the system, a piece of administrative debris. I had no other family, no aunts, no grandparents, no one. Just a fading photograph and a story I'd pieced together from whispers and redacted files. He was a good man, but troubled. He couldn't keep a job. He drank. He left me with nothing. That was the official story, the one I'd been given. I took the toolbox from Mr. Henderson. It was heavier than I expected. "Is this it?" I asked, my voice small. "This is everything?" He gave me a sad, apologetic look. "His landlord had it in storage. It's all they had left. The rest of his things were disposed of. I'm sorry, Maya." I just nodded, turning the cold metal box over in my hands. It felt final. This was the sum of a man's life. A box of tools. My inheritance. He dropped me at the apartment building, a grim concrete block on the industrial side of town. He helped me carry my things up to the 3rd floor. The room was small, clean, and crushingly empty. It smelled of fresh, cheap paint. "I'll call you in a few days to check in," he said from the doorway. "There's a matter of his property to settle. It's just a formality." I didn't know what he meant, but I was too tired to ask. I thanked him, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence in the room was absolute. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I was 18. I was free, and I was completely, utterly alone. I left the toolbox by the door. I didn't want to look at it. It was a monument to my abandonment, a rusty red reminder of the man who had left me with nothing but his absence. For 3 days, I did nothing. I sat on the thin mattress, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street. I ate saltines and drank water from the tap. The future was a vast, gray ocean, and I was adrift without a paddle. The numbness was a kind of armor, but on the 4th day, something shifted. A tiny, stubborn spark of curiosity flickered to life in the hollow space where my heart used to be. The box. I had to know. I dragged the toolbox into the center of the room and clicked open the 2 metal latches. They sprang open with a sharp, satisfying sound. The top tray was filled with what you'd expect: screwdrivers with worn wooden handles, a heavy hammer with a chipped claw, pliers, wrenches, a collection of mismatched sockets rattling in their plastic case. They smelled of oil and metal and something else, something familiar. Sawdust. My father had smelled of sawdust. I lifted the tray out, and there, underneath it all, nestled in the bottom of the box, was a single object. It wasn't a tool. It was a key. It was long, made of dark, heavy iron, with an ornate, clover-shaped head and a complex, toothed bit. It was rusted in places, a deep, blood-orange color that flaked off on my fingertips. This wasn't a key to a car, or a house, or a padlock. It was the kind of key you see in old movies, the kind that opens treasure chests or castle doors. Tucked beside it was a small, yellowed piece of paper, folded into a tiny, tight square. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. On it, written in a neat, concise script that I vaguely recognized as my father's, was an address. It wasn't an address I knew. It was in a part of the city I'd never heard of. Just a street name and a number. That was it. No explanation, no note. Just a key and an address. A question mark left behind by a ghost. I sat there on the floor, the key cold and heavy in my palm, the scrap of paper lying next to it. For the first time in 2 years, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a feeling I couldn't name. It was a dangerous cocktail of hope and fear. The key was an invitation, a loose thread in the tapestry of the story I'd been told. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had to pull on it. I had to know what door it unlocked. The phone rang the next morning, a shrill, jarring sound that echoed in the empty room. It was Mr. Henderson. His voice was all business, the gentle sympathy from the other day gone, replaced by bureaucratic efficiency. "Maya, good morning. I'm calling about your father's estate, as I mentioned. It's time to settle it." I sat up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. His estate? I thought the toolbox was all there was. "Legally speaking, no," he said. "There's a property, a commercial storefront registered in his name. It's in the Old North Quarter. The thing is, the city has it listed as derelict. He was years behind on the property taxes. There's a significant lien against it." He paused, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "Look, the city is willing to forgive a portion of the back taxes if the property is sold to a designated developer who's revitalizing that area. They've made an offer. It's not much, but after the liens and fees are paid, you'd walk away with about $5,000. It's a clean break." $5,000. It sounded like $1 million. It was a ticket out, a new start, somewhere else. The smart choice, the easy choice. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked, the question surprising me as much as it probably surprised him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Maya," he said, his voice softening slightly, returning to the tired father tone.
I've seen the file. The building is a shell. It hasn't been occupied in years. The inspection report says the roof is failing. There's water damage. It's a money pit, a liability. Taking the cash is the sensible thing to do.
It's what anyone would advise. What anyone would advise. The words hung in the air. The system had been advising me my whole life, advising me to be quiet, to be compliant, to not make waves, advising me to accept the story I was given. But I had a key in my pocket now, a heavy iron contradiction to their advice. "What's the address?" I asked, my voice steady. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Maya, there's no point in going there. It's boarded up." "The address, Mr. Henderson," I repeated, a new, unfamiliar firmness in my voice. He rattled it off. It was the same one. The same address written on the yellowed piece of paper from the toolbox. A jolt, like a low-voltage current, went through me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a destination. "I want to see it," I said, "before I decide anything." "That's not a good idea," he started, but I cut him off. "It's my property, isn't it? I have the right to see it." There was another pause. I had cornered him with his own rules, his own system. "Legally," he said, the words stretched out. "Yes, you do. But Maya, be careful. That neighborhood, it's not the best." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the room, my mind racing. The easy money, the clean break. It was a temptation, a siren song calling me to a safe, predictable shore. Just sign the papers, take the check, and disappear. Put the past in a box, just like my father's tools, and bury it. But what if the past didn't want to be buried? What if it was waiting to be discovered? I pulled out the small wad of cash from the state, the money that was supposed to be for food and bus fare to job interviews. I counted it. It wasn't much. I looked up the address on the cheap smartphone the state had provided me. It was a 2-hour bus ride away, a journey across the city to a place I'd only ever seen on maps, a grid of streets that looked forgotten and unimportant. The decision felt like standing on a diving board. I could turn back and climb down, back to the safety of the known, the $5,000, the sensible path. Or I could jump. I could leap into the unknown, with no idea how deep the water was or what lay beneath the surface. I pulled on my ill-fitting jacket, slid the iron key into my pocket where it rested, heavy and real, against my thigh, and walked out the door. The bus ride was a journey through the city's layers. We moved from the grim functionality of my new neighborhood through the polished, gleaming towers of the downtown core, then into the sprawling, comfortable suburbs with their manicured lawns, and finally, out the other side. The city began to fray at the edges. The buildings grew older, the streets narrower. The chain stores and coffee shops gave way to small, independent businesses with faded awnings and handwritten signs. It felt like traveling back in time. The bus wheezed to a stop at a corner marked by a rusted pole. "North Quarter," the driver called out without looking at me. I was the only one to get off. I stepped onto a cracked sidewalk, and the bus pulled away with a hiss of air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. The sky was a high, overcast gray, and the air had a damp, earthy smell, like a cellar. The street was lined with 2- and 3-story brick buildings, their facades weathered by a century of rain and neglect. Some were boarded up, their windows like vacant eyes. Others housed small, struggling businesses, a barber shop with a spinning pole that wasn't spinning, a tiny grocery with dusty cans in the window, a laundromat humming quietly to itself. And there,
Wedged between the laundromat and a building covered in peeling plywood was the address. It was narrower than the others, its brick a darker, soot-stained red.
The large display window on the ground floor was opaque with years of accumulated grime. The green paint on the door and window frames was blistered and flaking, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath. A faded, barely legible sign hung askew above the door. I could just make out the ghost of a word: repairs. It looked exactly as Mr. Henderson had described it: derelict, a shell, a mistake. My heart sank. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was a fool's errand. I almost turned around. I could walk back to the bus stop, go back to my empty room, and call Mr. Henderson. I could take the $5,000. I could be sensible. But my hand was already in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy iron of the key. I had come this far. I had to know. I walked up the single stone step to the front door. There was a large, black iron lock set into the wood, just below the handle. It was as old and rusted as the key. With a trembling hand, I raised the key, the teeth aligning with the complex shape of the keyhole. It slid in. For a moment, nothing happened. I held my breath, expecting it to jam, for this to be the end of the line. Then, I turned it. There was a horrible, grating screech of metal on metal, a sound that felt like it was tearing through 100 years of silence. Then came a deep, resonant thunk as the bolt inside the door retracted. It worked. The key actually worked. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was unlocked. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. My hand hesitated on the old brass doorknob. It was cold, and the metal was worn smooth in the place where 1,000 hands had pushed it open. What was I doing? Breaking into a derelict building? But it wasn't breaking in if you had the key. And it wasn't just any building, it was mine. A strange sense of ownership, fierce and fragile, rose up in me. This was the only thing in the world that was mine. I took a deep breath, the damp air filling my lungs, and I pushed the door. It groaned in protest, its bottom edge scraping against the floor, but it opened. It opened into darkness. Not a complete darkness, but a deep, dusty twilight. A single brilliant spear of sunlight pierced the gloom from a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, illuminating a swirling galaxy of dust motes. It was like stepping into a photograph, a moment frozen in time. The air was thick and still, carrying a complex scent I couldn't immediately place. It was the smell of old wood, of course, and dry dust. But underneath that, there was something else. A faint, metallic tang like a machine shop, a rich, organic scent like leather, and a sharp, clean smell like oil and solvent. It was the smell of work, of creation. I stepped inside, letting the heavy door swing shut behind me with a soft thud, plunging the room into near darkness again until my eyes adjusted. Slowly, the shapes began to resolve themselves from the shadows. I was in a long, narrow room. The front was a shop, a counter running along one wall. Behind it, shelves rose to the high, pressed tin ceiling. Everything, every surface, was draped in white cotton dust cloths, making the room look like it was full of ghosts. They were lumpy, indistinct shapes, silent and waiting. I walked further into the room, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the wide plank wood floor. I reached out and touched one of the cloths. It was heavy, stiff with dust. I took a corner between my thumb and forefinger and pulled. The cloth came away with a soft, tearing sound, releasing a fresh cloud of dust that made me sneeze. Underneath was a glass display case. Inside, nestled on faded velvet trays, were watches. Not modern digital watches, but old mechanical ones. Pocket watches with ornate engraved silver cases. Wristwatches with leather bands. Their faces a beautiful collection of tiny, intricate gears and dials. All of them stopped at different times. Another cloth covered a section of shelving. I pulled it down. More watches, clocks, and strange, beautiful objects. Music boxes with inlaid wood, ornate brass barometers, a ship's chronometer in a gimbaled wooden case. It was a treasure trove of forgotten technology, of things made by hand with patience and skill. This wasn't just a shop. It was a museum of precision and craft. The back half of the room was the workshop. A heavy wooden workbench sat under the largest window, which was so thick with grime it barely let in a sliver of gray light. Tools hung in neat rows on a pegboard wall above it. Tiny screwdrivers with color-coded handles, brass hammers, files of every shape and size, and dozens of pairs of tweezers and pliers, each one more delicate than the last. On the bench itself, the work was laid out as if the craftsman had just stepped away for a moment. A half-disassembled pocket watch lay on a small leather mat, its impossibly tiny screws arranged in a neat row. A magnifying loupe, the kind jewelers wear, sat next to it, its lens pointing at the ceiling. A deep sense of unease and wonder washed over me. Who was this person? Who had worked here? My father. The thought was a whisper, but it didn't fit the story. The man I'd been told about, the drinker, the drifter, the man who couldn't hold a job, could not be the same man who inhabited this space. This place was about order, patience, and incredible skill. This was the workshop of a master. I ran my fingers along the edge of the workbench, the wood worn smooth and dark with oil and time. This was his space. He had stood here. His hands had held these tools. A wave of dizziness made me grip the edge of the bench for support. It was too much. The story in my head was cracking, falling apart. I needed to sit down. I saw a wooden stool tucked under the bench and pulled it out. As I did, my knuckles brushed against a small, metal handle beneath the overhanging edge of the workbench. It was a drawer, so perfectly fitted that its seams were almost invisible. I pulled. It slid open with a smooth, silent motion. It wasn't full of tools. It was full of paper. Notebooks, filled with the same neat, compact handwriting from the scrap of paper. And in the center of the drawer, there was something else. A gray metal lockbox, the size of a shoebox. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, my breath caught in my throat. It was a thick stack of envelopes, dozens of them, tied together with a piece of old twine. On the top envelope, in that same precise script, was my name, Maya. And underneath the letters, there was a small, portable cassette player, the kind that was popular 20 years ago. A single cassette tape was already inside it. Its label, also handwritten, had just one word: listen. I sank onto the stool, the lockbox on my lap. The silence of the shop pressed in on me. The dust motes danced in the single beam of light. Everything had led to this moment. The key, the door, the shop, this box, these letters, this tape. This was the heart of the mystery. The answers were right here, in my hands. But I was terrified. What if the truth was worse than the story I knew? What if it confirmed everything, that he had left me, that he hadn't cared? But what if it didn't? What if it changed everything? I looked around the silent, waiting workshop. This place knew the truth. These tools knew the truth. It was time I did, too. I untied the twine. Before I tell you what was in those letters, I have to pause for a second. If this story is hitting you, if you've ever felt like you were uncovering a piece of your own history, a truth that someone tried to hide, then I want you to let me know in the comments. This community we're building here is for people who understand that our past is never really past. You're not alone in this. Okay, let's get back to it. I sat there on that dusty stool, the pile of letters in my lap, and I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the top envelope. They were all addressed to me in my father's hand. They were dated. The first one was from almost 2 years ago, just a few weeks after he had died. Or, a A few weeks after I was told he had died, I had to choose the letters or the tape, the written word or the spoken one. I chose the tape. I needed to hear his voice. I needed that connection before I could face the words on the page. My fingers fumbled with the buttons on the cheap plastic player. Play, eject, fast forward, rewind, stop. I pressed play. For a second, there was only the soft hiss of the magnetic tape spinning. And then, a voice. Maya? It was hesitant, rough, and so full of love and pain it felt like a physical blow. It was his voice. I remembered it from when I was very small, a low, comforting rumble. Hearing it now was like being struck by lightning. If you're hearing this, it means two things. It means I'm gone, and it means you found your way here. I knew you would. You were always my clever girl. A sob caught in my throat, hot and sharp. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle it. I have so much to explain, the voice on the tape continued, and not enough time. The letters will tell you everything. The whole ugly, complicated story. But I need you to hear this from me first. I need you to know I never abandoned you. Not for a second. He took a shaky breath. I could hear the sound of a chair creaking, the faint echo of a small room. He was here. He was in this room when he recorded this. Everything I did, from the moment your mother got sick, was for you. To protect you. Putting you in the system, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It felt like cutting off my own arm, but I had no choice. There were bad people, Maya. People I owed money to. Money I borrowed to try and save your mom. When she passed, they came for me. They were dangerous. I couldn't have them anywhere near you. So I made myself disappear from your life so they could never use you to get to me. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the dusty floor. The story I had carried for years, the heavy weight of being unwanted, of being left behind, was beginning to crumble. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection. A desperate, brutal act of love. This shop, his voice went on, softer now. This was my sanctuary, my secret. They never knew about it. I came here at night. I worked. I fixed things for collectors, dealers, people who paid cash and didn't ask questions. Every penny I saved. Some of it went to paying them off, bit by bit. The rest is for you. He cleared his throat, and his voice was thick with emotion. I'm close, Maya. I'm so close to being done, to paying it all off. And then I was going to come for you. We were going to start over, right here, in this shop. I was going to teach you the craft. Your hands, you have your mother's hands, steady. You'd be a natural. The tape hissed for a few seconds. I guess I ran out of time, he said, his voice barely a whisper. They must have found out I was almost clear. Or maybe they just got impatient. I don't know. It doesn't matter now. What matters is you, what you do next. Another pause. There's a choice in front of you. In the floor, under the workbench, there's a loose board, third from the wall. Under it, you'll find everything I managed to save. It's not a fortune, but it's a start. It's enough to pay the back taxes and get the lights turned on. Or it's enough to get you a bus ticket to anywhere you want to go. You can take the money, sell this place, and never look back. Start fresh. No one, least of all me, would blame you for that. It's the easy road. He sighed. Or there's the other road, the harder one. You can stay, You can make this place your own. You can learn what I couldn't teach you. The knowledge is all here, in the notebooks, in the work itself. This place, it's not just a building, Maya. It's a legacy. It's a home, if you want it to be. The tape player clicked, and the hiss stopped. The message was over. The silence that rushed back in was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of his voice, his love, his sacrifice. I sat there for a long time, just letting the truth settle over me. My entire world had been rewritten in the span of a 10-minute cassette tape. My father wasn't a villain. He was a hero, a flawed, desperate, tragic hero who had given up everything for me. I finally turned to the letters. I opened the first one, the one dated right after I'd been taken into care. My dearest Maya, it began. Today they took you. I watched from a block away, hidden in an alley. You were so small and so brave. You didn't even cry. I did. I cried enough for both of us. I read for hours, letter after letter, a secret history of the last 2 years of my life unfolded. He wrote about his nights in the shop, the intricate watches he was repairing, the slow, painstaking process of paying off his debt. He wrote about me. He had followed me from a distance. He knew I'd been moved from a foster home to the group home. He wrote, "I saw you in the park yesterday. You were reading a book. Your hair is longer." It was a record of a hidden life, a father's love persisting in the shadows. He documented every dollar he earned and every dollar he paid toward his debt, and he documented every dollar he saved for me. The last letter was different. The handwriting was rushed, shaky. "They know," it said. "Someone talked. They're coming. I don't have much time. The tape is in the box. The key is in the toolbox. You'll know what to do. I love you. I have always loved you. Be brave, my clever girl. Your father." I dropped the letter, my hands numb. It wasn't a construction accident. He was murdered. He knew he was going to die, and his last thoughts were of me, of making sure I found my way here. The grief that hit me was a physical force, a tidal wave that knocked the air from my lungs. I doubled over, clutching the letters to my chest, and I wept. I cried for the father I never got to know. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for his sacrifice, for the terrible, beautiful weight of his love. And when the tears finally subsided, a new feeling began to surface, hardening in my chest like cooling steel. Rage. And beneath the rage, determination. He had left me a choice. Take the easy road, or the hard one. Run, or stay and fight. I looked down at my hands, my mother's hands, he had said. Steady. I got down on my knees, my tears dripping onto the dusty floorboards, and I began to search for the loose board. The floorboards were wide and dark with age, worn smooth in the pathways between the door, the counter, and the workbench. I ran my hands over the rough wood, feeling for the telltale shift of a loose plank. Third from the wall, he had said. I counted them over. 1, 2, 3. This one. It looked no different from the others, but when I pressed on the edge, it gave slightly. There was no nail. I dug my fingernails into the crack and pulled. The board lifted with a soft groan, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath. The air that rose from it was cool and dry. Reaching into the darkness, my fingers brushed against something wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, rectangular package. I unwrapped it on the floor. Inside were 2 things. The first was a thick manila envelope. I opened it. It was full of documents. A deed to the property, in his name, free and clear. The original bill of sale from 40 years ago, in my grandfather's name. My family had owned this place for 2 generations. It wasn't just my father's shop. It was my inheritance, a legacy stretching back through time. And beside the deed, There was the title to a small, beat-up pickup truck, parked in a rented garage a few blocks away, paid up for the next 6 months. The second item was a simple metal cash box. It was heavy. I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. It was full of cash. Neat stacks of 20s, 50s, and hundreds bound with rubber bands. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was his life's work, a testament to countless lonely nights spent hunched over this bench, his love and sacrifice converted into paper and ink. There was a note on top, the last words he would ever write to me. This is for the taxes, the lights, and the first few months. The rest is your choice. Be smart. Be safe. I love you. I sat back on my heels, the cash box in my lap, the deed in my hand. This was it. The choice made real. Right here was the easy road. I could take this money, go to Mr. Henderson, sign the sale papers for the building, add that $5,000 to this stash, and disappear. I could go to college. I could travel. I could buy a small apartment somewhere quiet and anonymous. I could erase the last 18 years and start over as someone new. Someone without a past. It was so tempting. The thought of it was like a warm blanket on a cold night. The sheer relief of letting go, of not having to fight, of taking the simple, offered path. Who wouldn't want that? I thought about the group home, the cold bureaucracy, the feeling of being a number in a file. I thought about the pitying looks, the constant sense of being judged and found wanting. I could leave all of that behind forever. The anger and grief from before had subsided into a vast, hollow emptiness. I felt a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. Maybe running was the right answer. Maybe fighting was for other people, for people who hadn't already lost so much. I laid the money and the deed on the workbench next to the half-finished watch. I looked at the tiny, intricate mechanism, the gears and springs frozen in mid-motion. A complex machine waiting for a skilled hand to bring it back to life. I looked at the tools on the wall, each one in its proper place. I looked at the notebooks filled with my father's steady, patient handwriting, diagrams and calculations for escapements and balance wheels. This was his world. This was the world he had wanted to give me. Could I just turn my back on it? Could I sell it all to a developer who would tear it down and build something new and sterile in its place? Could I let his story, his real story, be paved over and forgotten? My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred silence of this place. I pulled it out. The screen showed an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Hello? Is this Maya Lane? A man's voice asked. It was slick and confident, the kind of voice used to getting its way. Yes, I said, my own voice a hoarse whisper. This is Tom Abernathy from Sterling Development. Your social worker passed along your number. We're the firm interested in the property on North Elm Street. I just wanted to reach out personally. I said nothing. Sterling Development. Even the name sounded cold and metallic. Listen, kid, he said, his tone shifting, becoming conspiratorial, like we were friends. I know the city's offer's on the table. It's a formality. We can make this happen fast. Cash in your pocket within the week. Think of it, a fresh start. You don't want to be tied down to a dilapidated old building in a neighborhood like this. It's a boat anchor. We're offering you a lifeboat. A boat anchor. He called my father's legacy a boat anchor. The emptiness inside me vanished, replaced by a sudden, hot surge of protective fury. This man, with his slick voice and his easy money, was trying to buy my father's sacrifice and sell it for scrap. He was trying to bulldoze my history. I was there last night, an old man from the neighborhood had told me, his voice a low growl. I saw the whole thing. This wasn't in the script, this memory, this voice, but it was there. a flash of a conversation I'd overheard, a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. The story had been that he fell, but the whispers said he was pushed. This developer, this company, were they connected? Was their revitalization project the reason my father was impatiently dealt with? The easy wrong wasn't just selling a building, it was letting them win. It was letting them get away with it. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like the loudest sound in the world. What was that? Abernathy asked, an edge of annoyance in his voice. I said no, I repeated, louder this time, my voice ringing with a newfound certainty. The property is not for sale. Now hold on, kid, let's be reasonable. We are being reasonable, I said, the we feeling strange and powerful on my tongue. It was me and my father, me and my grandfather. The shop is not for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. Don't call this number again. I hung up before he could reply. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, something that felt like power, like purpose. I looked at the money on the bench. It wasn't a bus ticket anymore. It was a war chest. I looked at the deed. It wasn't a liability. It was a declaration of independence. I picked up the phone again. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number. I pressed call. Henderson, he answered, his voice flat. Mr. Henderson, I said. It's Maya Lane. I've made a decision about the property. I took a deep breath, looking around the dusty, silent shop. My shop. I'm not selling, I said. I'm staying. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture Mr. Henderson at his cluttered desk, pinching the bridge of his nose, the crease between his brows deepening. Maya, he finally said, and his voice was heavy with a weary sort of pity. We've been over this. The building is a wreck. The taxes are overwhelming. You have no experience, no capital. Staying is not a viable plan. It's a fantasy. It's my father's legacy, I said, the words tasting of iron and conviction. And it's my home. It's a derelict property that will drain you of every cent you have and then some, he countered, his voice rising in frustration. That developer's offer is a gift. It's your only realistic way out of this. Maybe I don't want a way out, I said softly. Maybe I want a way in. Another pause. This one was different. It was thoughtful. When he spoke again, the frustration was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. Okay, he said. Okay, Maya. If you're serious about this, then you can't do it alone. You'll need help. Legal help. You'll need to get the deed transferred to your name, officially. You'll need to set up a payment plan with the city for the back taxes. You'll need to get the utilities turned on, inspections. It's a mountain of paperwork. Can you help me? I asked. I don't know who else to ask. I heard him sigh, a long, drawn-out sound of a man who knew he was about to take on more work than he was paid for. My job is to see you transitioned into independent living, he said, almost to himself. This is certainly independent. All right, Maya, I'll make some calls. There's a pro bono legal aid service that works with youth aging out of the system. I'll see if they can take your case. But you need to understand, this is going to be hard. Harder than anything you've ever done. I know, I said. I'm ready. After I hung up, a wave of pure terror washed over me. What had I just done? I had turned down a fortune, what felt like a fortune to me, and committed myself to an impossible task. The reality of it crashed down on me. The dust, the grime, the silence, The sheer scale of the decay. Mr. Henderson was right. It was a fantasy. I was a fool. I slumped onto the stool, my head in my hands. The elation of my defiant phone call evaporated, leaving behind the cold dregs of doubt. I was just a kid, an orphan with a box of old tools and a pocket full of ghosts. Who was I to think I could do this? Then my eyes fell on the workbench, on the half-finished watch, on the notebooks filled with my father's patient, steady hand. He had faced down gangsters and worked in secret for years, all for this. All for me. He didn't quit. He didn't run. He worked. I stood up. The first step was simple. Cleaning. I found a broom in a back closet, its bristles worn and frayed. I started at the back of the workshop and began to sweep. The dust was inches thick in places, a soft gray blanket over everything. As I swept, I uncovered the history of the floor. Dark stains from spilled oil, a constellation of tiny scratches from dropped tools, the faint outline of where a chair had sat for decades. Each sweep of the broom was an act of reclamation. I was not just cleaning a floor, I was clearing away the years of neglect, of silence. I was making a space for the future. It took me all day. I filled bag after bag with dust and debris. I found old rags and, using a bucket of murky water from a tap in the back that miraculously worked, I began to wash the grime from the windows. As the first pane of glass became clear, a rectangle of pale, watery afternoon light fell across the workshop floor. It was the first new light to enter this room in years. It felt like a benediction. The work was grueling, physical, and deeply satisfying. My muscles ached, my hands were raw. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly powerful. This was not the passive acceptance of the group home. This was active creation. I was not being acted upon. I was acting. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. True to his word, Mr. Henderson connected me with a lawyer, a young, earnest woman named Sarah, who specialized in exactly these kinds of tangled, hopeless-seeming cases. She met me at the shop, her practical boots clicking on the newly swept floor, her eyes taking in everything. "He was a watchmaker?" she asked, peering into a display case. "I think so," I said, "among other things." She looked at me, then at the piles of paperwork, the deed, the tax notices. "All right," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's save your home." We spent days on the phone and in city offices. We negotiated with the tax assessor, setting up a payment plan I could just barely afford. The first payment took a huge chunk of the cash my father had left, but as Sarah handed over the cashier's check, she smiled. "You're current," she said. "The lien is lifted. The city can't take it from you now." It was the first major victory. Then came the inspections. The building inspector was a grim-faced man named Sal who looked at the peeling paint and the water stains on the ceiling with deep suspicion. He walked through with a clipboard, making notes that sounded like a death sentence. "Faulty wiring. That's a fire hazard. Roof needs a full replacement, not a patch. Plumbing's not up to code." I followed him around, my heart sinking with every new pronouncement. At the end, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "It's a lot of work, kid," he said. "A whole lot." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I can do it." He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze sharp. He looked at the clean floor, the newly washed windows, the determined set of my jaw. He sighed, then clicked his pen and made a note on his clipboard. "I'll give you a temporary certificate of occupancy," he said, not looking at me, "on the condition that you get a licensed electrician in here within 30 days to draw up a plan for the rewiring. And you get a roofer to give you an estimate. Don't make me regret this." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a chance. The electrician and the roofer were another mountain to climb. Their estimates were astronomical, far more than the cash I had left.
I sat at the workbench that night, staring at the numbers, the reality of my situation crashing down on me again. The money was running out. The problems were bigger than I could handle. The fantasy was over. I was going to fail. I was going to lose this place, just like Mr. Henderson predicted. I put my head down on the worn wood of the bench, the same bench my father had worked at, and for the first time since I'd found this place, I felt truly defeated.
As I sat there in the dark, my forehead pressed against the cool, worn wood of the workbench, a sense of despair washed over me. The numbers on the estimates were like a judgment. They were too big, too impossible. I had been so arrogant, so sure of myself. I had defied the system, hung up on the developer, and made a stand. But a stand wasn't enough. You needed money, you needed skills, you needed help. And I was running out of all three. I thought about my father. Had he felt this way? This crushing weight of impossibility? He had faced down loan sharks, worked in secret, lived a double life. My problems, a leaky roof and old wiring, seemed so small in comparison, yet they felt just as insurmountable. I was about to give up, to just pack a bag and walk away from it all, when I heard a soft tapping at the front window. I lifted my head. Through the newly cleaned glass, I could see a figure, a silhouette against the streetlights. It was an old man, leaning on a cane. I recognized him vaguely. He was a regular at the laundromat next door. I opened the door a crack. "We're closed," I said automatically, the words feeling strange in my mouth. The old man smiled, a gentle, crinkle-eyed expression. "I know," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I've been watching you. Every day you're in here, cleaning, working. You brought the light back into this place." He gestured with his cane toward the shop. "I knew your father," he said, "and your grandfather before him. My name is Arthur." My breath caught. "You knew my father?" "Oh, yes," he said, his eyes distant. "Leo. He was a good man, a quiet man, a genius with his hands. He fixed my father's watch, the one he carried in the war. It hadn't ticked in 50 years. Leo brought it back to life. He said nothing is ever truly broken, just waiting for the right touch." Arthur looked at me, his gaze kind. "I own the laundromat next door. I see the electrician's truck, the roofer's van. I hear them too, shaking their heads, giving you numbers that are meant to scare you away." "They did," I admitted, my voice thick. "Then you need to find people who want to help you build, not scare you away," he said simply. He pointed his cane down the street. "You see the barber shop? Go talk to Marco. His brother is an electrician, a good one, an honest one. And the grocery on the corner? Maria's cousin is a roofer. He does good work, fair prices. You just have to ask. This neighborhood, we look out for our own." I stared at him, speechless. A fragile, tentative hope began to bloom in my chest. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you help me?" Arthur's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep seriousness. "Because this shop is the heart of this block," he said. "When it went dark, a part of the neighborhood died with it. You're bringing it back. That's worth something. That's worth everything. Now go on. It's getting late." He turned and shuffled back toward his laundromat, leaving me on the doorstep with his words echoing in the quiet street. The next morning, I did exactly what he said. With a knot of anxiety in my stomach, I walked into the barber shop. It was empty except for a man in a white coat sweeping up hair. "Marco?" I asked. He looked up. "I'm Maya from the old watch shop." A slow smile spread across his face.
I know who you are. The ghost. We all thought that place would be empty forever. I took a deep breath. Arthur said your brother is an electrician. The story tumbled out of me, the impossible estimates, the 30-day deadline. He listened patiently, then picked up an old rotary phone and dialed. He spoke in rapid-fire Italian, his hands gesturing wildly. When he hung up, he looked at me. My brother, Gianni. He'll be here this afternoon. He'll look at it. No promises. Gianni arrived in a beat-up van with Gianni's Electric painted on the side.
He was loud, cheerful, and smelled of garlic and solder. He walked through the shop, whistling, pulling on wires and making notes. Ah, knob and tube, he said with a dramatic sigh. The work of the devil. But my grandfather taught me, it's not so bad. The inspector, he sees this, he gets scared. But the bones are good. He gave me a quote that was still a lot of money, but it was a third of the first estimate. And, he said with a wink, I can break it up. We do the main panel now, get you legal with Sal. The rest, we do room by room, as you get the money. A payment plan. For a neighbor. It was the same with the roofer, Maria's cousin. He climbed up on the roof, came down covered in tar and grime, and gave me a price for a patch that would hold for a few years, long enough for me to save up for a full replacement. Your father, he said, wiping his hands on a rag, he once fixed a music box for my daughter. For free. He said it was a beautiful machine that deserved to sing again. It's time we returned the favor. Slowly, piece by piece, the impossible became possible. The community that I never knew I had began to wrap its arms around me. Gianni and his apprentices rewired the main service, bringing bright, steady, safe light to the workshop. The roofer patched the leaks, stopping the slow decay. Arthur would leave a cup of coffee on my doorstep every morning. Maria from the grocery would drop off sandwiches, refusing to take my money. I was still alone, but I wasn't lonely anymore. I spent my days cleaning and my nights studying. I devoured my father's notebooks. They were his real legacy. Not the money, not the building, but the knowledge. He had documented everything. The delicate art of escapement repair. The complex mathematics of gear ratios. How to mix your own shellac. How to blue steel hands over an alcohol flame. It was a language I didn't understand, but I was determined to learn it. I started with the simplest things. I bought a cheap, broken clock from a thrift store, and, following my father's diagrams, I took it apart. I cleaned every gear, every spring. I put it back together. It didn't work. I took it apart again, and again. On the fifth try, after hours of frustration, as I nudged a tiny wheel into place with a pair of tweezers, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Tick. And then again. Talk. It was alive. The sound was a symphony. I held the clock to my ear, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down my face. I had fixed something. I had taken something broken and made it whole again. I had found the right touch. The shop was changing. It was no longer a dusty tomb. It was clean, bright, and organized. I had set up my own small workspace on the big bench, my father's tools laid out beside me. The feeling of his presence was still there, but it was no longer a haunting. It was a comfort, a quiet encouragement. I was building a new life, not on the ruins of my past, but on its foundation. The day the sign went up was a turning point. It wasn't a fancy sign. I had found an old piece of wood in the back and had carefully painted it myself, using the lettering from one of my father's old notebooks as a guide. It said simply, Lane and Daughter, Clocks and Watches, Repairs. I hung it from the old bracket above the door, the same place the original sign had hung. As I tightened the last bolt, a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Arthur was there, beaming. Marco and Gianni, taking a break from their own shops. Maria, wiping her hands on her apron. They applauded. It was a small, quiet ovation, but it meant the world to me. I had a name. I had a trade. I had a community. I unlocked the door and turned the small cardboard "closed" sign in the window to "open." The little brass bell above the door, which I had polished just that morning, was silent. For hours I sat at the workbench, my stomach in knots, pretending to be busy oiling a set of screwdrivers. What if no one came? What if this was all a grand, expensive folly? What if my father's talent hadn't been passed down to me? Maybe I was just a girl playing dress-up in her father's workshop. Just after noon, the bell jingled. My heart leaped into my throat. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, clutching a small velvet pouch. "Are you open?" she asked tentatively. "Yes," I said, my voice coming out as a squeak. I cleared my throat. "Yes, we are." She approached the counter cautiously, as if not sure this was real. "I saw the sign," she said. "Lane. Leo Lane fixed my husband's pocket watch years ago. Is he—" "He's passed," I said softly. "I'm his daughter, Maya." She looked at me with kind, watery eyes. "I'm so sorry, dear. He was a wonderful man." She opened the pouch and tipped its contents onto the velvet mat on the counter. It was a beautiful, delicate lady's wristwatch with a silver band and tiny diamonds marking the hours. But one of the hands had come loose and was rattling around behind the crystal. "This was my mother's," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was told it couldn't be repaired, that the parts weren't made anymore." I picked up my loop, my hands trembling slightly as I fitted it into my eye. The world dissolved into a magnified landscape of metal and glass. I looked at the watch. I saw the disconnected hand, the delicate post it had broken away from. It was a difficult repair, requiring a steady hand and a microtorch, a technique I had only read about in my father's most advanced notebooks. Fear whispered in my ear, "You can't do this. You'll ruin it. You're not him." But then I heard my father's voice, the one from the tape. "You have your mother's hands. Steady. You'd be a natural." I looked up from the watch, meeting the woman's hopeful, anxious gaze. I took a deep breath. "Nothing is ever truly broken," I said, the words feeling right and true in my mouth. "It's just waiting for the right touch. I can fix it." A week later, she returned. I had spent 3 sleepless nights working on her watch. I had failed twice, nearly melting the delicate hand. But on the third try, guided by my father's notes and a strange, intuitive sense I didn't know I possessed, I succeeded. I presented it to her on a velvet cushion. It was ticking. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial. She burst into tears. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing a wad of cash into my hand that was far more than I had quoted her. "You've given me back a piece of my mother." That was the beginning. Word began to spread through the neighborhood, then through the city. The ghost of North Elm Street had come back to life. People started bringing me their broken treasures. A grandfather clock that hadn't chimed since the moon landing. A music box that held a favorite lullaby. A ship's chronometer that had guided a family across the ocean. Each object came with a story, a piece of someone's history entrusted to my care. I wasn't just fixing machines, I was repairing memories. I was connecting people to their past. The shop became more than a business, it became a hub. A place where stories were shared. Arthur would come in for coffee and tell tales of the neighborhood in the old days. Marco would debate politics while I filed a gear. Maria's kids would do their homework at a small table in the corner. My lonely, silent workshop had become a living room. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A man in an expensive suit got out. It wasn't Tom Abernathy, but he had the same aura of slick corporate power. He came into the shop, the bell jingling. He looked around, his eyes taking in the clean, bright space, the ticking clocks on the wall, the customers waiting patiently. "My Elaine?" he asked. I nodded, not leaving my workbench. "I'm from Sterling Development," he said. "My colleague, Mr. Abernathy, he no longer works with us. We're still redeveloping the area. We've acquired most of the block." He looked at me, a flicker of something, annoyance, respect, in his eyes. "You're holding out." "I'm not holding out," I said, picking up a tiny screwdriver. "I'm staying put." He sighed. "Look, we can make you a new offer. A substantial one. Name your price." I stopped my work and looked at him. I looked past him, through the window, at my sign. Lane and daughter. I thought about the key, the letters, the cassette tape. I thought about the feel of the broom in my hands, the smell of solder, the first tick of that broken clock. I thought about my father's sacrifice and my community's kindness. How could you put a price on that? "This shop is not for sale," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's my home." He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and walked out of the shop without another word. I had won. But it wasn't about winning against him. It was about winning for me, for my father, for this place. I had chosen the harder road, and it had led me here. It had led me home. My father had given me a key, but the real gift wasn't the building, or the money, or even the tools. The real gift was the story it unlocked. It taught me that we are more than the stories others tell about us. It taught me that some things that look like abandonment are actually acts of radical love. And it taught me that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you have the courage to build, for yourself, with your own two hands. The past is never truly broken. It's just waiting for us to